Hello, and welcome to my video for this week's sampling technology assignment. For this week's assignment, I chose to focus on creating an application for the Amazon Alexa device, which for the Alexa device is also referred to as Skills. So I was actually really surprised how easy it was to get an application started and actually get it running and testing it for the Amazon Alexa, which was actually really I considered pain-free and enjoyable. So to really get started, all I had to do was go to developer.amazon.com/Alexa and log in with my Amazon developer account, and then from there, all I really had to do within the developer console was select that I want to create a new skill, and then being taken to this menu here that you can see now, I have the option to input the name for the skill I want to create, the language, and then the model that I want to use, which is kind of just, I guess, depends on what you plan on doing with your app. But for my application, I chose custom because I didn't need to use any of the, I guess, advanced features like smart home, music, video, or other stuff like that. Something that made this extremely easy to use was I found down here where it asks you to choose a method to host your skills backend resources. I guess somewhat recently, Amazon has released this Alexa hosted version here, which handles all of the back end aspects of the application for you. And you don't really have to worry about that. I guess originally you had to utilize AWS services like Lambda to actually get your code working for an Amazon app or for an Alexa app. But now they've added this, and it is free to an extent, and it is really removes the headache of trying to get started. So from there, we're going to dive over to this menu here. This, what we can see on this screen, is a convenient test environment for Alexa device apps. What allows me to do here on this left side, I can kind of see an emulator of you can either type or click this mic and hold to communicate with an Alexa device. So to get started, we're just going to start my application. For my application, I'm just having Alexa tell the user to guess a number between 1 and 10. The user tells Alexa a number, and Alexa tells the user whether or not they guess the correct number. So right there, what I just did is the same thing as telling Alexa that I want to start the app. Alexa tells me, hello, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. Can you guess it? And what I'm going to do now is talk to Alexa by clicking on this mic. 5. So now Alexa is processing the result, and in a second she will let me know if I guessed the correct number or not. I guessed the wrong number. It was 1. So that's the gist of my application. Pretty simple. Important to note is these menus right here, or these code blocks. This is JSON files for input and output that's being passed back and forth between the Alexa device and the user, and it allows you to visualize the code or what's actually being sent and going on the back end, what messages are being sent. And this is a useful debugging feature because you can see under the hood of what is actually happening as a user communicates with Alexa, which I feel is something that's important with these voice communication devices, because it's never really, for more advanced applications where you're asking multiple questions, it's not as simple as just looking at one input, one output. There's probably multiple going on that a developer would need to look at to properly debug. So now we're going to go in, look at the code.
You guessed the wrong number, it was 1.
Right there, Alexa just yelled at me that my number was wrong. But okay, so looking at the code here, there is a lot of this was boilerplate code that was that came a part of the Alexa custom application. Things that I had to make changes to, or important things that I think are worth noting, is how things are done. So with Alexa, so with these voice devices in general, they have to be listening for certain cues, certain key phrases or words, so that they know how they should respond. And how that is done with Alexa is through this thing called intents. So intents is what, for my understanding, what it essentially is when a user is talking, Alexa is picking up for certain key phrases or words. If I can pull this up here. All right. So for example, in my application, I have created an intent that is listening to the user to find out what the answer they're given is. And so there's certain phrases the user could say that would inform Alexa that they've answered. For example, the number is number, and then saying the number, or just saying a plain number like I did, 5. That is essentially how Alexa knows what the next what how she should act in the code. So now when we go to the code, I can walk you through a little bit of that, of how the process actually goes. So starting out, we saw that Alexa gave an initial answer to us when we opened up the application, and that is found in this block of code here, constant launch request handler. What's going on in this is essentially, this is the opening phrase that Alexa is going to say to a user when they start up the application. And then what happens next, an important line of code to note, speak, is how Alexa says stuff verbally to the user. Below that is reprompt, which is where the device is waiting for input from a user, and then below that is get response, where the device is waiting to receive that response. So what happens with these responses is that based off the intent that is heard determines which of these blocks would be triggered. So for instance, with my application, when a user states the number, this block of code here gets triggered because it is listening for, Alexa knows to listen for a number, and if a number is heard, it knows that this block of code is what needs to be executed. So the code itself isn't anything special. I've got, in JavaScript, a random number being generated, and then checking to see whether or not that that random number is what the user said, which is found here. And then from there, I just have Alexa speaking what the result of the answer is. So that's really the main functionality. There's some other handlers that you can see, like help. These are all kind of default ones. I didn't mess with those at all. Help, cancel and stop, session ended. One that is important to know, that's when you're trying to add new handlers in, this was actually an issue I ran into. It kept telling me that you've chosen the answer intent handler, but it wasn't actually executing the block of code. But after doing some research online, I found on the Amazon developer forums that when you're adding new handlers to the code, you need to make sure to add that as well to the skill builder section of code here. If you don't, the Alexa device actually won't execute the block of code that you're trying to. So here I had to answer intent handler. Before I added that, my block of code here was not getting executed, but after I added that, everything was executed perfectly and everything worked fine with that. So that is the gist of my application and the code behind it, talking a little bit about digital assistants and voice interaction in general. I'd say probably the biggest, not necessarily security issue, but more of a privacy issue, and I've seen it talked about several times when it comes to these digital assistants, is that they're in a way always listening to some degree, because to activate these digital assistants you have to address them as Alexa, OK Google, or some other key phrase that these devices are waiting to pick up for. And so a big concern is that these devices are always listening to users and gathering that data, even if they're not necessarily using that device for something. So that is definitely a big concern, and I'm actually not sure how companies have addressed this. From a business standpoint, it makes sense why companies would want to gather as much passive data from users as possible, because the main companies that do this, Amazon, Google, are major tech companies, and especially Amazon has a lot to gain from, eavesdropping in on their customers and understanding the kind of stuff that they're talking about. So that's probably the biggest privacy issue that I see, is that these devices have the capability of always listening and keeping track of essentially everything you've said when you're in earshot of these devices. So I think something that is really cool though, to counter this, to counter that big negative privacy issue there, I think that the use of voice is going to greatly improve the accessibility for users on most web applications. I think as most web applications begin to try and integrate more with these digital assistants, I think we'll see a lot more usability for all user groups, especially say uh, in the disabled user group, there may be people that aren't able to interact with some websites as well just because of their design. But if there's some type of voice capabilities added into those websites, these users may be able to actually use these websites better than they were before, which could be a huge advantage. Huge advantage. I mean, I think adding voice is a very interesting thing to a lot of websites because I think for a lot of websites it could be really beneficial, but I can also see that right now voice kind of seems to be the latest tech, one of the latest tech trends crazes along with uh, big data and machine learning, and it kind of seems like a lot of people are just trying to throw those things into every industry and field possible and to see what sticks. So I think right now we're going to see a lot of different companies testing out voice interactivity with their applications, but I think in the future we'll get to see later on which which domains really thrive by having voice interaction added to them. Yeah, so for this sampling technology, I really didn't have too many issues. I found a really good tutorial, which I'll link in the description, that 7 minutes long and got me up and running with creating Alexa applications, which I found really surprising because I mean it's a really powerful concept to be able to get voice interaction or voice interactive application built that quickly. So yeah, not too many issues. There's a few code things that I had to look up just because of my unfamiliarity with JavaScript and kind of trying to understand the better understand the Alexa code that's already built in. But for the most part, I didn't have too many issues with this and found the project enjoyable. Thank you.